From West Philadelphia to building a multi-million-dollar real estate portfolio, to standing in this room speaking to you. Where I'm from, that's not normal. But what I've learned is that where you start in life will try to define you, unless you decide it won't. And today isn't just about my story, it's about decisions. I was born in West Philadelphia and raised in a neighborhood where ownership was not something you saw every day. You saw survival. You saw people getting by. You saw talent, but not always direction. And so I had to make a decision. Where do I see myself going? Because when you grow up in that environment, it's easy to start believing that that is the way life is supposed to be. That this is my ceiling. I remember early on realizing something that stuck with me. If I kept going down this path, as the people around me, I will end up just like them with a similar story. I didn't want to have that. I remember vividly in 8th grade, I had 3 D's, 3 B's, and I had 1 C, and no A's. And I skipped school. I was drinking alcohol since 4th grade. I was smoking weed. I just didn't love myself. I was upset. But on top of that, we were living in a studio apartment in North Philadelphia where we had a hot plate, no stove, a bathroom sheet, not a bathroom door. We had a bathtub, not a shower. And we had 15 people living in this studio apartment with 1 bed. And we had rats and roaches and mice and flies competing for space and food with us. And I had siblings who were parents as teenagers. And I recall that moment vividly, like, this is not the way life is supposed to be. So I had to make a decision. And at that very moment, I remember my stepdad. He had came back in our life and we was living with him. And he said, don't be an F up like me and everybody in this place. And I can see in his eyes the hopelessness, the struggle. He wanted more. He said, don't do as I do as I say. He said, I know what it takes to be successful. I've never applied myself. And at that moment, I accepted the fact that I should take the perfect from the imperfect. He gave that speech to my siblings, but they could not believe because he had not achieved. I said, you know what? I'm going to have the faith the size of a mustard seed. I'm going to start to believe this. And it was at that moment that I started to shift the way I thought. Because I started to realize the truth is this. You don't rise to your goals. You fall to your environment unless you intentionally change it. There wasn't a moment when things just started magically clicking. No. It was more like a small series of realizations because I started to have those tough conversations with myself. I decided to start being vulnerable, asking people for help. I said, I want to get out of here. I don't know how. So I started talking to teachers, talking to administrators, friends. I created my own board of directors. So if I didn't have a proper mother or father figure or people who knew the system to get into college or be successful, I started to gather mentors and sponsors like people gather baseball cards. And I would ask them questions. And they started to invest in me and pour in me. And that's why I tell people I'm not self-made, I'm community-made. And so I remember going to order some food with one of my mentors, and I said, I want some root-rye rice. And he said, what in the world are you talking about? I said, root-rye rice, you know, like the thing with the broccoli and it tastes good, you know, like it's root-rye rice, it's like seafood. He said, I realized at that moment that I struggled with enunciating words. I meant to say shrimp fried rice. And so I got a high school teacher that wasn't even in my small learning community to spend 1 hour a week with me in high school to teach me how to enunciate words. And I also did that when I got to Bowdoin College. I asked a theater teacher, I said, can you help me learn how to enunciate words? I want more for myself. And they did. And so I was very fortunate because those moments really helped me understand that nobody was coming to save me. There was no blueprint handed out by my parents. No one gave me the answers. It was my life to change, and if I wanted to change, I had to change. I had to change the way I thought, the way I moved. And so I embraced what I call the 3 Ds. Discipline, desire, determination. First I had the discipline, first I had the desire. I first had this desire, the burning desire to change my life and those around me. I said, I have to get the hell out of here. And I'm using the real words that I used during this. I really used the word H-E-L-L. I was so upset. I just had to get out of there. So I said I want to have a better life. But I realized that desire does not equal results. And so I started to work on discipline, coming up with routines, where I would say I gotta get up in the morning, gotta turn in my assignments, gotta go to class, get tutoring, do much better. But I realized something else, determination, because there were moments when nobody was clapping, when I had to just do the work, when actually there would be setbacks. I would move forward, some try to push me back. And so I was really, really fortunate to master the 3 Ds, and that transformed my life. It just made me see life very, very differently. And what I learned is that I went from having those 3 Ds and 3 Bs and 1 C, because I was cute, to valedictorian in high school, school president, class president, debate captain, track captain. And this is the kid that went out to run track in middle school, and we didn't have a field. The coach was gonna say, I need you to run around the block. I said, ain't nobody got time for that. To graduate and getting a presidential scholarship to go to Bowdoin College. And being on the Dean's list 3 out of 4 years. And going off to Wall Street. And what I learned is this: if you do what's necessary, then you do what's possible. You will find yourself doing the impossible. So I never imagined in a million years that this would happen. And as I continue to push myself and believe, I wind up buying 1 piece of real estate in 2009. By 2018, I had 9 rental units. By 2019, I had 35 rental units. By 2020, I had 105. So during the pandemic, I bought 70 rental units, which compose of a 24-unit apartment building, a 14-unit apartment building with a restaurant, a 12-unit apartment building, a 9-unit apartment building, a 6-unit apartment building, and 5 individual houses. And then the other thing I did is I told my employer, at the time I was 37, so I told my employer it's time. And so my coworkers had said, where is KR? Did he call in sick to work today? Someone said, no. I called in rich. And so once I hit that 105 rental units, I didn't go back to work. Because I really believed in that concept of if you do what's necessary, then you do what's possible. You find yourself doing the impossible. And that was a big, big, big shift for me. And as I got deeper into real estate, I started to understand something most people miss. There's a difference between making money and building something. At first, you're just trying to figure it out. You're making mistakes. You're learning the hard way. You take losses. But over time, if you're disciplined, you see patterns. You start to understand systems. And when things change, because without systems, you don't own the asset. The asset owns your time. That was a big shift for me. Moving from hustle to ownership, from survival to structure, from structure to stability, financially, emotionally, was a big eye-opener.